right, if we're all settled then, let's pray and then we'll start. Father, thank you for bringing us all here today on this fantastic weather day. Thank you for showing us this sunlight and warm air again. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to study your word in peace. We ask that you guide our study today, and we ask that you give us discernment while we look through the scriptures. And we ask that in your name. Amen. All right, so we're going to look at Judges chapters 15 and 16 today. And if we remember last week, just kind of to recap where chapter 14 ended, we are still in the story of Samson. We will finish that today. But where we left off at the end of chapter 14, they were having their 7-day wedding feast. And after 3 days, the Philistines couldn't solve his riddle. And then on the 7th day, they finally got the answer from Samson's fiancée. So they were able to solve his riddle. He got mad that they cheated to solve it. But he still owed them. The terms of the bet were 30 changes of clothes or 30 garments. So even though they cheated to solve it, he recognized that he did lose the wager. So he went to collect those items, but he went to collect them from other Philistines in a town called Ashkelon, where he killed 30 of those men, Philistines, and brought their stuff back for the 30 that he owed to the Philistines at his fiance's town. He did that so that he could be a little bit further away when he did it. Surely they would have been mad to know that the gear that he just dropped off to him came from their dead comrades. But he went to a different town. He got the gear. He brought it back to him. And then it says the very last verse of chapter 14, the last two verses, after he got the garments and brought them back, it says he went in hot anger back to his father's house. So he needed some time to cool down. Obviously, he's mad at the men at that town. He's also mad at his fiancée because she caused this by telling the secret to his riddle to those people. And then the very last verse of chapter 14, where we kind of left on a cliffhanger, says, and Samson's wife was given to his companion who had been his best man. So Samson is back at his father's house in a different town. He doesn't know that his fiancée, that he just squared up this wager with her townsfolk. He doesn't realize that that's not his fiancée anymore or his wife. That's actually the wife of his best man now. And that's where we'll pick it up in chapter 15. So Samson, we probably knew already. We're going to find out more. His temper is on a different level. As you saw, because of the rage that he went down to collect his 30 garments, that he killed 30 men to get those garments, all from a riddle. So starting at verse 1 in chapter 15, verses 1 and 2. After some days, at the time of the wheat harvest, Samson went to visit his wife with a young goat. And he said, I will go to my wife in the chamber. But her father would not allow him to go in. So he comes back in. So he's just come from, he delivered the goods that he owed from the wager. And then he's still upset. So he goes back to his parents' house, his father's house. But now he's coming back to see what he thinks is his wife, and he brings a goat. He's going to sacrifice this goat, and they're going to eat it, a nice meal. But her father won't let him to go in to see her. In verse 2, her father said, I really thought that you utterly hated her, so I gave her to your companion, and that was his best man. Now listen to what her dad says. Is not her younger sister more beautiful than she? Please take her instead. So this guy doesn't get it. The lady doesn't get it. Samson, with his sweet sense of humor and temper, he's not thrilled about this. He just cooled down enough to go back and see her. And when he got there, there is no more her to be seen because she's somebody else's wife now, his best man's wife. we might remember the story of Laban and Jacob, a similar story where Jacob agreed to work 7 years for Rachel. And then at the end of the 7 years, Laban tricked him and gave him Leah, Rachel's sister, instead, and then had him work 7 more years for Rachel. This is a little bit similar with the father-in-law pulling some sort of trickery and then offering the other sister. Doesn't seem like great parenting. But this last thing that this man and her, they're both responsible, that they've done to Samson, it really puts him into another rage, an even worse rage. And he'll point out he feels completely justified in what he's about to do because of what's happened. So verse 3, and Samson said to them, "This time I will be innocent in regard to the Philistines when I do them harm." So Samson went and caught 300 foxes and took torches, and he turned them tail to tail and put a torch between each pair of tails. And when he had set fire to the torches, he let the foxes go into the standing grain of the Philistines and set fire to the stacked grain and the standing grain, as well as the olive orchards. So if we remember, the Philistines in their chariots, they loved the flat ground, and they were very known for their farming for the grain. Whereas the Israelites, they had the mountainous area, which is why the Philistines couldn't really get to them with their chariots. But the difference in terrain is the difference in what they were farming in those places. So the Philistines, they loved to have the grain. They had a right area for it. But the thing about grain, when it's dry, it'll catch fire. So Samson takes these 300 foxes, or the word's actually for jackal, if you know what a jackal is, and he ties torches between the tails of every 2 of them and lights the torches on fire. So while these animals are running panicked, and they're just going to run off like crazy because they're tied to each other, and there's no controlling an animal like that. They're just going to run. And the whole time they're running, they're dragging these torches that are lit through these grain fields, lighting the whole country on fire. All the grain, it says the olive orchards, lit that all on fire. A pretty clever little trick by Samson there. Obviously, he didn't do it in secret. He knew that they would notice. So verse 6, then the Philistines said, "Who has done this?" And they said, "Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion." So everybody knew why this happened, right? What's it say? And the Philistines came up and burned her and her father with fire. So if we remember, what started this whole saga was Samson told the riddle to the Philistines. They didn't know the answer. They threatened her that she had to tell them the answer, or they would burn her and her father's house with fire. So she told them the answer, which caused Samson to have to do what he ended up doing. And the end cause of that, the effect, is they end up getting burned with fire anyways. She would have been better off just saying, "Samson, these people are threatening me. What can you do to help?" Right? But she gave in. She told them the secret, which caused her death by fire anyways. Samson, we'll find out, didn't hate her just because she had been given to his companion. He was not happy about them killing her. He was already saying, "I'm justified in whatever I do," when he burned down the fields. And then the way they got back at him was to burn down this woman and her father, at least. So they already threatened to do it once if she didn't tell the riddle, but they ended up coming back and doing it anyways. So who knows why they thought this would end up being a good result to kill this woman that Samson has decided to start a war over. So what were they thinking? Philistine decisions. The blue line is our smart decisions by the Philistines. And then our red area is what were they thinking? So they continue to try to get back at Samson. It just keeps going back and forth. So verse 7, Samson said to them, so they have just burned her and her father with fire. Verse 7, Samson said to them, "If this is what you do, I swear I will be avenged on you, and after that I will quit." And he struck them hip and thigh with a great blow. and he went down and stayed in the cleft of the rock of Edom. So what that's saying is, when he strikes them hip and thigh, that means he gave them a beating. It's not clear on whether or not he killed all of them or just beat all of them. But whatever it was thorough, and it was a defeat. It said struck him hip and thigh with a great blow. Generally, we would think that would mean he did kill them in battle. But verse 8 there, afterwards he went and stayed at the cleft of the rock of Edom. Again, Samson is not doing any of this in secret. They know who he is. They know the general area of where he is. And he's just really posting up. He's fortifying at this rock. And he's saying, come on by whenever you're ready. Okay. Verse 9, here they are. Then the Philistines came up and encamped in Judah and made a raid on Lehi. So the place where Samson's hiding is not hiding, where he's staying is in Judah. It's just not in any of the cities. Now this city, Lehi, that's where the Philistines came to. Verse 10, and the men of Judah said, why have you come up against us? So they don't know what's going on. The Israelites of Judah are just there in Lehi. The Philistines come marching in. When it says they encamped there, that means militarily. And so the guys from Judah, why have you come up against us? And the Philistines said, we have come up to bind Samson, to do to him as he did to us. So they want to capture him and bring him back. And then who knows what they have planned for him. So he knew that they were going to come for revenge. The guys from Judah, they didn't really know. So when this army shows up to the guys of Judah, they're like, look, man, it wasn't us. It was Samson, and he's not here. He's somewhere else. So you come to the wrong place. It wasn't us. Verse 11, then 3,000 men of Judah, these are Israelites, went down to the cleft of the rock of Edom. So they're going to where they know Samson's at. These are Israelites going to see another Israelite. They take 3,000 to go talk to him. So they obviously knew that he could be dangerous. Otherwise, why not just send a couple elders? You send 3,000 men to go talk to one guy. It's a show of force, right? So they go down to the rock and they say to Samson, do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What then is this that you have done to us? And he said to them, as they did to me, so I have done to them. So when they said, do you not know that the Philistines are rulers over us? You can tell we're in the book of Judges. The Philistines aren't supposed to be rulers over them. We go back one book to Joshua, and they're told, drive these people out and take this land. This is their land that the Philistines are encroaching on. And instead, it's easier to just let the Philistines come in and rule over them, and they can just submit to the Philistines. And as we see, they submit to their lifestyle. They submit to their culture. They submit to their idolatry, their women. It's not a good mixture. But these men of Judah, they are perfectly okay with the Philistines ruling over them, and they're wondering why Samson isn't getting on board with the program. You're going to make things worse for us if you start fighting back and rebelling, is their point. And then Samson said, as they did to me, so have I done to them. So every time they do something to Samson, he pays them back manyfold, and then they do something back to him, and he pays them back manyfold, and it just never stops. Now, he was expecting the Philistines to come to him. Like we said, when he went to the rock, he picked that spot for a reason. He's fortified. It's a cleft in the rock. Nothing can come at him from behind. He can see everything out one side, and he can defend himself in that one area. So even a normal soldier without his type of strength, this is a smart place to fortify at. But somebody with his strength, he'd be about unstoppable there. So he's waiting for the Philistines, but the Israelites are the ones that show up instead. But we find out that they don't want to hurt him. They just want him to they don't want their city to get destroyed because of him either. Since he's causing the problems, they just want to take him back and give him to the Philistines. That way they can stay out of it. The Philistines, their problem is with Samson. It seems like Samson's problem is only with the Philistines. So these guys from Judah are like, nothing to do with us. They have no sense of brotherhood with the other Israelites, at least not right here. They're more just worried about being further oppressed by the Philistines. So verse 12, and they said to him, these are the men of Judah, they said to him, we have come down to bind you, that we may give you into the hands of the Philistines. And Samson said to them, swear to me that you will not attack me yourselves. And they said to him, no, we will only bind you and give you into their hands. We will surely not kill you. So they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. So here's a question. Why did Samson make them swear to not attack him? Why was he so concerned that these men of Judah didn't want to attack him? Right? It's because even though they may have forgotten that they're all Israelites, Samson did not. So he didn't want the men of Judah to attack him, not because he was scared, because he knew he could kill all of them. He didn't want them to attack him so he wouldn't have to kill them, right? He says, swear that you won't attack me and I'll go peaceably with you, because our problems aren't with each other. It's with these Philistines. So if you just want to take me to them, we can sort that out over there. I'll go with you guys now, right? And in verse 6 is going to start off with the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. But if we remember the last time it said the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon Samson, it was in chapter 14 that we looked at last week. It was 14:6. It says, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion in pieces as one tears a young goat. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. So when the scripture said that the Spirit rushed upon him, it immediately was followed by some sort of act of not normal human strength. And we see the same thing happen where we're at now. Chapter 15, verses 14 to 17. So they had just bound him with these new ropes. They're taking him back to the Philistines. Verse 14, when he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting to meet him. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became as flax that has caught fire, and his bonds melted off of his hands. And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, and he put out his hand and took it, and with it he struck 1,000 men. And Samson said, and right here in your text, different translations are going to have it listed different, but a lot of them it'll be kind of written as a stanza. It's not written as a regular verse. It'll have quotations around it, and it'll be short little. That's because he's singing. It's poetry in this part. So after he kills these 1,000 men with this jawbone, he starts singing. With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have struck down 1,000 men. In verse 17, as soon as he had finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone out of his hand, and that place was called Ramath Lehi, which means hill of the jawbone. So they named that after him. There are plenty of different places in Scripture where you'll see a poem or something listed like that. So whenever you come across your reading and you see those quotation marks and it looks like it's just written differently, you can tell. Those are usually poetry or songs. We've passed a couple already that we really haven't mentioned. There was the Song of Moses. I believe Miriam had one as we were moving through. All right, verse 18. So Samson has a lot has just happened, right? He just got bound in ropes by the Israelites from Judah, taken back to Lehi, the Israelite city in Judah, but the Philistines were there. So he gets taken back to the Philistines, but instead of going with them, he just went ahead and broke those ropes, picked up a jawbone, killed all the Philistines. But now he's tired, right? Verse 18, and he was very thirsty, and he called upon the Lord and said, you have granted this great salvation by the hand of your servant. And shall I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? He's talking about the Philistines there. This might make us think about the wanderings in the wilderness. God would save them through some miracle, and then right after that, they would start complaining about food or water or whatever it might be at the time. So this never fully left the nation. That said, Samson surely is exhausted at the end of this. This is the first time that we see him pray in Scripture. We're only ever going to see him pray twice. So this is the first one of those two prayers. It's a good prayer at the beginning. He starts off, "You have granted this great salvation by the hand of your servant." So he gives glory to God for the deliverance. That starts off good, and then finishes it with his complaining about being thirsty. His whatever we're calling his supernatural strength, the miracle of his strength that God gave him, it doesn't seem to have affected his other normal. He still gets tired. We see him take naps and sleep. We see him get thirsty. He's still just a normal guy. He just gets these periods of great strength whenever the Lord anoints him with it. Verse 19, he says he's thirsty. God can help that. In verse 19, "And God split open the hollow place that is at Lehi, and water came out from it. And when he drank, his spirit returned, and he revived. Therefore, the name of it was called En-Hakkore. It is at Lehi to this day." All right, so similar again to the times of Moses, the Lord provided water when they were thirsty, provided water for Samson while he's thirsty, and right out of the rock. Notice that in Judges here, the rock was not struck. It was opened up to provide water only after Samson prayed. And in that, we can be reminded of Christ and living water. And there's where we will divert for just a few here. We're going to look at a couple places that gets brought up. The first one being John chapter 4, verses 13 and 14. Jesus talking to the woman at the well. Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. That the water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up into eternal life." Same book, a couple chapters later, John chapter 7, verses 37 and 38 says, "On the last day of the feast, the great day, Jesus stood up and cried out, 'If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink.'" Now they're at the feast in Jerusalem. So thousands of people, right? People picture Jesus being the quiet guy that sits in the corner and never wants to stir anything up. Or some people think he's the guy that just comes into the temple, flips the tables over, and keeps on moving. Turns out he did both of those things and more. So all these people in this temple, Jesus is just one guy in the temple, right? But he's standing up and shouting for everybody to hear. So he was not being a quiet person in that moment. "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water." That does two things. Jesus solidifying that he's the Messiah, that he's the one you need to believe in to get the living water, and also verifying the scriptures. Jesus himself attesting to the Old Testament scriptures as from God. And then back to Judges, we have one more verse there, verse 20. "And he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. It's a strange way to end a chapter. All right. Samson's still there. Why is it giving the end of his judgment? It'll give it again, but we might pick up as to why, because it seems like he did this judging for 20 years and then got lazy. So as we move into the next chapter, we might think Samson's doing pretty well where his story's at. The chapter ends on a pretty high note, which is rare in the book of Judges. He seems to be in a good place with God, which is extremely rare in this book. But as we'll find out, sometimes the people that are the strongest physically are the weakest spiritually and mentally. So chapter 16, verse 1, Samson went to Gaza, and there he saw a prostitute and went to her. So this is Gaza, the same Gaza that we have currently. So Samson, this good Nazarite that he is, having just he is single. His what he thought was wife has just been murdered. So he is single, goes down to Gaza, finds a prostitute. And what is that with this guy and the Philistine women? Right? 2 for 2 now for Philistine women. Still will not find an Israelite woman. These are not things he's supposed to do. Verse 2. The Gazites were told, those were the people from Gaza, were told, Samson has come here. So they all knew. Everybody, guarantee that if you were a Philistine in this area, you knew exactly who Samson was, and you hoped to know where he was at the time. These people knew. So the Gazites were told, Samson has come here, and they surrounded the place and set an ambush for him all night at the gate of the city. They kept quiet all night, saying, let us wait till the light of the morning, then we will kill him. So Samson, before going here, he knows that Gaza is a Philistine stronghold, one of the strongholds of the Philistines. He just doesn't care. These people still have revenge on their minds because he keeps killing them. Samson still hates all of them because they keep treating him poorly, which is why he keeps killing them. But most important in Samson's mind, he loves their women. So he just wants to go down to where the Philistines are because he loves Philistine women. But still, even with all that, we see that God has a purpose for Samson and for his life, even with all of these mistakes. And God's going to protect him through this, even while he's in the middle of his fornication. So verse 3, but Samson lay till midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the posts, and pulled them up, bar and all, and put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that is in front of Hebron. So here's a map. Gaza, all the way on the southern, southwestern corner there, we'll see Gaza up in the land of Judah. If you look all the way over, 3/4 of the way towards the Dead Sea, you'll see the town of Hebron, right? And we see all them lines in that map, all the little kind of the ripples, right? The blue is water, but these little ripples here, that's like mountains and hills. So we got Samson taking the city gates up, bars and all, and carrying them from that city to the hills outside of that city. That's pretty good. So Gaza, they were known as a Philistine stronghold. They knew it. Everybody in the region knew it. So Samson, why would he take the gates? It seems like he's making a point to these men that you can lay in wait for me, and you can be confident that your town is secure. But here I am leaving with your security, right? That town is no longer fortified if there aren't any gates, right? If we've watched any movie that has these big towns or castles or whatever, right? The whole thing is you have to guard the walls and guard the gate, right? Once they break through the gates or find a way over the walls or through the walls, that's done. That town's done, right? So Samson takes the gates of this stronghold, moves them halfway across the country, and puts them on a hill over here in front of this other city and says, you're not as secure as you guys thought you were. Right. So you can lay in wait for me, but here's what I did to your giant gates. So we might think he maybe didn't even look for a cleft in a rock that time. Maybe he just watched the guys as he left and waited to see if anybody wanted to take him up on a game. I don't know. But by now, we should be aware of two things about Samson. He has great strength provided by God, and he has spiritual and physical weaknesses regarding women. Verse 4, yet another woman. This isn't the prostitute. This isn't the first one. This is a third one. And after this, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Okay, 3 for 3 on the Philistine women. Samson is still not even looking at Israelite women. Loves the Philistine women. Delilah, the name itself means devotee. So a Philistine named devotee, we can assume, is a temple prostitute, because that's what That's what they did in those cultures. So he sees another Philistine woman. Obviously, he thinks he's in love because he's constantly in love with these with these people he's not supposed to be mixing with. He almost acts like it's his duty, like to alone integrate the Israelite people in with the Philistine people. It's strictly prohibited, but this third Philistine woman in Samson's life will be the last one that he makes that mistake with. Verse 5. And the lords or elders of the Philistines came up to her, that's Delilah, and said to her, seduce him and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him. And we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. All right. So let's think back. Samson sees this woman without even talking to her. He's in love again, as has happened previously. She has no interest in him, but she does have an interest in money. And we have these elders. If we go off of Judges 3:3, it makes us think that there may be 5 of these elders. Judges 3:3 says there's 5 lords of the Philistines at that time. If that number remains the same, we can assume 5 here, which would make 5,500 pieces of silver for her to betray Samson, which is a pretty good. That's a lot. If we remember, the Lord got betrayed for 30, so 5,500. That's a hefty price. But what does the scripture say about that? About that silver? Mark 8:36 says, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? And that's exactly what they're telling or asking Delilah to do. She's more than happy to do that for him. She can get rich by doing just this one thing, right? All she has to do, she doesn't even have to kill him, right? She just has to find out where his strength comes from, and then she's rich. Okay. Well, find out and betray him, right? She has to find out and then tell them where it comes from. But what good is this money to a dead person, right? So if you do this at the cost of your own soul, it's no good for you. And as we find out, she doesn't even try to hide her intentions as we go through. She's upfront and obvious about her intentions. Samson just doesn't care. Verse 6 and 7. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies and how you might be bound so that one could subdue you. She's asking him up front, right? Verse 7, Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, then I shall become weak like any other man. So Samson, also a pretty dedicated liar during his time, although this is not a woman you would want to tell the truth to, doesn't mean the right answer is lying. The correct answer would be get away from her, right? It's not tell the truth or lie, it's run. But his lust drives him to not care that she's asking how to take away his strength. It's lust combined with arrogance. She's being upfront about what she wants to know and why she wants to know it. And him, in lust and arrogance, is like, yeah, well, it doesn't matter anyways. I'll tell her this story or that story or whatever it is for now, right? Verse 8. Then the lords or elders of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, right? So he just told Delilah that this made up story about the bowstrings was how to take his strength away. In the next verse, then the lords of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now she had men lying in ambush in an inner chamber, and she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he snapped the bowstrings as the thread of flax snaps when it touches the fire. So the secret of his strength was not known. Okay, well, that's good. But it's also bad because exactly after he said, it comes from this thing. Then she tried to tie him up with those things and then tried to get him ambushed by the Philistines after he was bound by those things. So it's a good thing he did lie. But again, he could just leave. He could just go back home. He could get out of the Philistine city. He could go back to the Israelites. But what did God tell Manoah, his dad, and what did God tell his mom? He was raised for a reason, and his reason was to judge the Philistines. So even while we watch Samson struggle through all these sins and all this weakness, we understand God already knew all this was going to happen and planned accordingly to make useful for his will out of it. Verse 10. Then Delilah said to Samson, so she's already asked once, and he lied to her, and she tried it, and it didn't work. Then Delilah said to Samson, behold, you have mocked me and told me lies. Please tell me how you might be bound. And he said to her, if they bind me with new ropes that have not been used, then I shall become weak like any other man. Well, if we read earlier, well, yeah, the guys from Judah bound him with new ropes and took him to those Philistines. And what'd he do? He snapped those ropes, picked up a jawbone, and cleaned out the city, right? These people must not have heard about the new rope thing, because they're going to try it again. Verse 12, so Delilah took the new ropes and bound him with them and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And the men lying in ambush were in an inner chamber, but he snapped the ropes off his arms like a thread. So Samson told her another lie about where his strength comes from. Just like last time, she tried to test his story immediately, but he breaks free. But don't we think that Samson should be concerned that this woman keeps trying to test what he says? Well, it seems kind of obvious that if I keep telling you these are the things that will end me and you keep trying them, that maybe we should just go our separate ways, right? Verse 13, then Delilah said to Samson, until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me how you might be bound. And he said to her, if you weave the 7 locks of my head with the web and fasten it tight with the pin, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So he's basically saying, if you take me to the salon, get me my hair did just right, then I won't have any strength. It's a strange thing, but she bought it. Verse 14, so while he slept, Delilah took the 7 locks of his head and wove them into the web. And she made them tight with the pin and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he awoke from his sleep and pulled away the pin and the loom and the web. But we might notice that he's getting closer to telling her the truth, because now he is involving her hair, or his own hair. So we can see kind of some signs that this is starting to wear on him, and that maybe his arrogance is building up even more and saying there's really nothing that she can do to take this away. It's who I am. I am Superman, right? So he tells her another lie. She tests it again. It fails again. Verse 15, and she said to him, how can you say, I love you, when your heart is not with me? Now, was her heart with him? No, this is a conniving, evil woman here. When your heart is not with me, you have mocked me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength lies. So she's talking about love, but she's only interested in the money. So maybe she does have some love for those 5,500 pieces of silver, but there's clearly none for Samson. She's trying everything to betray him to get to that money. But Samson, he's still blinded by his lust, and he doesn't see it coming. So verse 16, and when she pressed him hard with her words day after day and urged him, his soul was vexed to death. So he got tired of listening to her mouth. Verse 17, and he told her all his heart and said to her, a razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak like any other man. His parents may have told him that so here's the secret about Samson. His strength didn't come from his hair. He thought it did, presumably because he was told that it did. But the reason why his strength leaves him when his head is shaved isn't because the hair is a different length. It's because the spirit left him because he broke his vow. The vow with God is where his strength came from. His strength came from God through that vow. Part of that vow was keeping his hair long. He breaks the vow. He breaks the covenant with God. It's over. So, what he maybe should have told her is that his strength comes from God, not the Canaanite gods, not Baal or Ashtoreth or whoever, but that his strength came from Yahweh. And then maybe things would have turned out different. Although we have no reason to think so. I believe things went exactly according to plan as foreknown. So verse 18, when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called the elders of the Philistines, saying, come up again, for he has told me all his heart. Then the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hands. And she made him sleep on her knees. So picture him passed out on the couch, right? And he's got his head just kind of laid across her lap. He's sleeping there. And she called a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. So Samson's sleeping across her lap. Some other guy comes in, shaves Samson's head, right? And then the last sentence of verse 19. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. So the Philistine shaved his head. People get this wrong. Delilah did not shave Samson's head. Samson didn't shave his own head. A Philistine man shaved Samson's head while he was sleeping on Delilah's lap. But after that, the Philistine didn't start tormenting Samson. Delilah did. She's the one that started it. So, verse 20. And then she said, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And he awoke from his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times and shake myself free. Right? He thought he's just going to break the ropes or whatever it is this time again, right? I'll shake myself free. The last sentence, but he did not know that the Lord had left him. Right? That's chilling. Somebody that thinks that they have a purpose given by God and that they're in the middle of doing it, and that this purpose is going to protect them and save them as they move through life. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. That's terrible. We see that his lust and his arrogance, they caught up to him. After he told her the lies about the source of his strength, and she tried all of them, he still trusted her enough or lusted her enough to tell her the truth when it was obvious she was going to try it. She tried everything else. She was going to try this too. And even after that, he still thought he would, I will go out as at other times and shake myself free. He still thought, no big deal, right? The arrogance. Verse 21. I'm sorry, verse 20. No, we already had verse 21. And the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles, and he ground at the mill in the prison. So a lot happens very quickly. He gets his head shaved. She starts to torment him, sees that he can't fight back. The Philistines come in, they grab him. As soon as they seize him, they gouge out his eyes. Why? Because if he does get his strength back, you don't want him seeing where you're at, right? Because he's going to find it and you're going to die. So they gouge out his eyes immediately. And then they bring him where? Back to Gaza, where he took the doors, where he took the gates. That's their stronghold. So they take him back down there with bronze shackles. They had him grind mill in the prison. This is normal. Now, how your normal farmers would grind mill is there would be a donkey or some sort of farm animal that would either push or pull this thing around, and that giant concrete, what's called a millstone, as it rolls around in that circle, around and around, it's crushing that mill. It's grinding it down. And the parts that you don't use, you remember the chaff? It would just blow away, right? And then the good part stays in the bottom. But that's how you grind mill. And that's what they had their new strongman prisoner Samson doing. Keep in mind, even though he didn't have the strength of the Lord at this point, we can assume he's still a pretty stout individual. So they have him doing this physical work, forced labor, grinding mill. Verse 22. But what happens after you shave your head? But the hair of his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. So he had some time to reflect on his decisions while grinding at the mill, blind. Couldn't see any more Philistine women. Probably had no use for his eyes anymore after that, right? He ends up in this weird, through his whole life, this weird teeter-totter of hating Philistine men more than anything in his life, and still willing to give up everything, including his own life, for Philistine women. It's such a strange mindset. So now that he didn't have eyes, he no longer had Philistine women to focus on. Only the Philistine men, which is bad for them. But that's where it should have been and was supposed to have been the whole time. His whole life was supposed to be focused on the Philistine men. Verse 23. Now the lords or elders of the Philistines gathered to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their god, and to rejoice. And they said, our God has given Samson, our enemy, into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their god, Dagon. For they said, our God has given our enemy into our hand, the ravager of our country, who has killed many of us. Okay? We're not going to get too deep in the Dagon today. We will as we move forward. Dagon's going to keep popping up with the Philistines as they continue to get embarrassed. But we see that they're celebrating their victory over Samson. We see that they are, even though it's improper because they have the wrong God, they are doing what the Israelites should have been doing, which is defeat your enemy, give the glory to your God, right? It's what the Philistines are doing that the Israelites are not doing. So they're praising their God Dagon for delivering Samson to them. Coming up soon, within the next couple books, the Philistines are going to capture. You guys remember the Ark of the Covenant we talked about when we studied the Pentateuch? So the Philistines are actually going to capture the Ark of the Covenant, and they're going to take it back, and they're going to put it inside Dagon's temple. And that's when, I think we talked about it briefly before, that's when their statue of Dagon is going to start taking a beating. It's a pretty funny story, but not today. So verse 25, and when their hearts were merry, they were drunk. When they were drunk, they said, call Samson that he may entertain us. So this guy that used to kill all of them, now he's blind and not strong. So bring him out here so he can entertain us, right? Dance for me, entertainer, right? Something like that. Very embarrassing for Samson, for sure. So they called Samson out of the prison, and he entertained them. They made him stand between the pillars. And Samson said to the young man who held him by the hand, let me feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean against them. Now the house was full of men and women. Now it's saying house, but it's not a house like our home, right? This house apparently is big enough. Well, it's going to tell us. All the lords of the Philistines were there, and on the roof there were about 3,000 men and women who looked on while Samson entertained. Right, so this house is at like it's like a theater. It's like an outdoor, these big Roman buildings that have the pillars and the flat roofs. We see them not quite the size of the Colosseum, but yeah, a building structure like that. Yeah. So a lot of people though, and they're all there to be entertained by their new toy, the weakened version of Samson. Verse 28. Then Samson called out to the Lord, and here we are. Samson's second prayer. Only two in all of it. His second prayer. Samson called out to the Lord and said, "O Lord God, please remember me and please strengthen me only this once, O God, O Yahweh, that I may be avenged on the Philistines for my two eyes." And Samson grabbed the two middle pillars on which the house rested, and he leaned his weight against them, his right hand on one and his left hand on the other. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." Then he bowed with all his strength, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people who were in it, so that the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he had killed during his life. So Samson pushes the entire thing over, pushes the pillars down that are supporting everything. And when he does that, the whole top collapses, everybody inside, including Samson, everybody on top, everybody dies. One big pile. Okay. The dead that he killed in his death were more than those who he had killed during his life. We know that he had killed thousands. So this was more than that. Verse 31, then his brothers and all his family came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. He had judged Israel 20 years. Both chapters end with that same thing. He judged for 20 years. So that is the end of Samson. Kind of anticlimactic, kind of a sad ending for somebody that was supposed to be a hero. So after Samson's final prayer, he pushes down the pillars. The entire structure falls on him and the Philistines. It kills everybody. But the question from the beginning still stands. We did stop in the middle and talk about it. She kept asking him, where does your strength come from? So that's our topic today. Where does your strength come from? Verse 22, when we covered it, it started talking about his hair had started growing back. But again, we need to understand his strength did not come from his hair. The strength came from his God. Same way that our strength doesn't come from going to the gym, lifting weights, going out, running routes, getting gains. Right? It's not where our strength comes from. It's supposed to be from God. There's nothing wrong with getting physical strength. It just has to be prioritized. And to recognize what it seems like Samson didn't recognize until right before he died, is that we should not rely on our own strength. We should always only rely on God's strength, because, right, we might think we can pick something up and, through whatever happens in life, the next day you may not be able to pick that up anymore. So that's not the kind of strength that we should focus on. It should be spiritual strength, not as much physical strength. So we can ask for God for both physical and spiritual strength, mental strength. Those are good things to ask for, ask to accomplish his will. But that's our thing to keep in mind this week is where does our strength come from?